My husband kept saying his female coworker was like family until the night my son accidentally exposed what was really happening. The first time I met Jenna, she hugged my husband too comfortably. Not romantically, not obviously inappropriate, just familiar. At the time, I ignored the weird feeling completely. Because honestly, I didn't want to become one of those jealous wives reading too deeply into harmless behavior. She's basically family, my husband Eric laughed while introducing us during his company Christmas party. Jenna smiled instantly. We'd practically survived that office together. Everyone laughed, even me. And logically, nothing seemed wrong. She was pretty, confident, funny, the kind of woman people naturally liked immediately. Still, something about the way Eric acted around her stayed in my mind afterward. Not flirtatious exactly, just lighter somehow. More relaxed than he'd been at home in a long time. But marriage changes people over years, especially after kids, stress, routine, bills. So again, I ignored the feeling. At least I tried to. Over the next few months, Jenna's name started appearing constantly in our life. Jenna said this. Jenna recommended that restaurant. Jenna thinks our manager's quitting. At first, it sounded normal. Coworkers talk about coworkers. But eventually, her presence started feeling strange for someone I barely actually knew. One night while folding laundry, I casually asked, "So does Jenna ever talk about dating anyone?" Eric looked up from his phone immediately. "Why?" Too quickly. I shrugged lightly. "Just asking." He laughed awkwardly. "She's not my type, if that's what you're implying." That answer immediately irritated me. Because I never implied anything. Still, I dropped it. Honestly, part of me was scared to push too hard. Because once you start questioning trust inside a marriage, everything feels fragile afterward. Then came the late work nights. At first, they sounded believable. Big project deadlines, new clients, staffing problems. But eventually, patterns started bothering me. Eric suddenly cared more about his appearance, started wearing cologne to work again, became weirdly protective over his phone. And the worst part? Whenever I looked upset, he'd immediately act like I was imagining things. "You're overthinking again." Again. That word slowly started making me feel crazy. Because honestly, maybe I was overthinking. Marriage after 15 years doesn't exactly stay exciting all the time. People get distant sometimes. Still, my instincts kept whispering the same thing. Something felt wrong. Then one Saturday afternoon, Jenna unexpectedly showed up at our son Tyler's soccer game. That completely threw me off. Eric smiled the second he saw her. Too naturally, too happily. "She lives nearby," he explained quickly. She was already in the area. The explanation felt prepared somehow. And honestly, the weirdest part wasn't Jenna being there. It was Tyler's reaction. My 10-year-old son ran toward her immediately yelling, "Dad, Jenna actually came." Actually came. Like this had already been discussed before. I noticed Eric's expression tighten instantly afterward. Then Jenna awkwardly handed Tyler a sports drink. "Wouldn't miss it, buddy." Buddy. I stood there smiling politely while my stomach quietly twisted itself into knots. Because suddenly, Jenna no longer felt like just a coworker. She felt emotionally inserted into spaces that belonged to family. That night after the game, I finally confronted Eric properly. "Why does Tyler know her that well?" Eric looked exhausted immediately. "Melissa, seriously?" That didn't answer my question. He rubbed his forehead tiredly. "She's been around the office events. Tyler met her before. But why did he expect her at his soccer game?" Silence. Then instantly, "You're making this weird." That sentence made me angrier than anything else. Because people say that when they want your discomfort to sound irrational instead of addressing it honestly. "I'm not making anything weird," I snapped. "I'm asking why your coworker suddenly feels emotionally involved in our family." Eric looked genuinely frustrated now. "She's just a friend." Friend. Family. Coworker. The title kept changing depending on the argument. And honestly, that scared me more than if he'd simply gotten defensive. Because inconsistent explanations usually mean someone's trying to manage perception carefully. That night, we barely spoke before bed. Around midnight, I woke up and noticed Eric wasn't beside me. I found him downstairs sitting in the dark kitchen staring at his phone. The second he noticed me, he locked the screen immediately. That tiny movement hurt more than I expected. Because innocent people rarely panic over normal phone use. "What are you hiding from me?" I whispered. Eric looked exhausted. Almost sad. "I'm not doing this tonight." Then he walked past me upstairs without another word. And honestly, that's when fear started replacing suspicion. Because deep down, I think part of me already knew my marriage was changing in ways I couldn't stop. But I still wasn't prepared for the moment the truth finally came out. 3 nights later, during a completely normal family dinner, Tyler casually looked up from his plate and said, "Mom, when is Jenna sleeping over again?" The entire room went silent instantly. I slowly looked toward Eric, and the expression on my husband's face told me immediately whatever was happening between him and Jenna had already gone far beyond friendship. After Tyler accidentally exposes a secret sleepover, Melissa finally forces Eric to tell the truth. But what he admits next is even more complicated than an affair. The second Tyler said it, the entire room froze. Even the sound of forks against plates stopped. My heart started pounding so hard I could physically hear it in my ears. When is Jenna sleeping over again? I slowly turned toward Eric. And honestly, I think I already knew something terrible was coming based on his face alone. The color drained from him instantly. "Buddy," he said too quickly, "what are you talking about?" Tyler frowned in confusion. "The night I stayed at Grandma's house." My stomach dropped immediately, because suddenly, I remembered that night. About 3 months earlier, Eric insisted Tyler should stay with his mother, because we both had work early the next morning. At the time, nothing seemed strange. Now everything suddenly felt horrifying. Tyler kept talking innocently, completely unaware of the tension exploding around the table. "You said Jenna was sad and needed help." I looked at Eric so slowly it almost hurt. And honestly, the fear on his face terrified me more than anger would have, because people look like that when they know the truth sounds terrible no matter how they explain it. "Melissa," "No," I cut him off immediately. "Don't you dare start talking to me like I'm crazy again." Tyler looked between both of us nervously now. Did I say something bad? Instantly my heart broke, because none of this was his fault. I forced myself to soften my voice. "No, sweetheart." Eric immediately stood up. "Tyler, go finish your homework upstairs." Our son hesitated. Honestly, I think even he sensed something was very wrong. But eventually he nodded and quietly left the kitchen. The second his footsteps disappeared upstairs, I looked directly at my husband. "Tell me the truth." Eric rubbed both hands over his face shakily. "It's not what you think." Honestly, that sentence almost made me laugh, because every woman whose instincts are being dismissed hears that exact line eventually. "Then explain it." Eric sat down slowly, like his body suddenly weighed too much. "Jenna stayed here once." Once. The word hit me like an insult, because clearly he'd already decided what version of events sounded safest. "You brought another woman into our house while I thought she was just your coworker?" "She slept in the guest room." I stared at him in disbelief. "You expect me to believe that?" Eric looked emotionally exhausted. She was going through something serious. Again with the vague answers. Again with the missing details. I slammed my hand against the counter hard enough to make him flinch. "Stop talking around the truth." That finally shook something loose in him. Eric looked down quietly before whispering, "Her husband was abusive." The room went silent. Completely silent. My anger paused instantly. Not disappeared. Paused. Because honestly, that wasn't the answer I expected. Eric swallowed hard before continuing. "She called me one night after he hit her." I stared at him frozen. She was terrified. Suddenly, pieces started rearranging themselves in my head differently. The late night calls, the emotional closeness, the protective behavior. Still, something about this explanation didn't fully settle right either. "So instead of telling your wife," I whispered carefully, "you secretly brought another woman into our house?" Eric closed his eyes briefly. I knew how it would look, because it looks exactly like cheating. I wasn't cheating. That answer came instantly, firmly, and honestly, part of me wanted desperately to believe him. But another part of me couldn't ignore how many lies already existed around this situation. Why did Tyler know her well enough to expect her at his soccer game? Eric hesitated too long again. That hesitation hurt more than words. "Because Jenna's been around more than you realized." I physically stepped backward. "How much more?" Eric looked ashamed now. And suddenly, I realized the emotional betrayal might be bigger than physical cheating ever could have been. "She'd come over sometimes while you were visiting your sister or working late." My chest tightened painfully. "You brought her into our family life behind my back." It wasn't like that. "And what was it like, Eric?" His voice cracked slightly when he answered. "I was helping someone who had nobody." And honestly, that's what made this so complicated. Because maybe he truly believed that. Maybe he wasn't lying about wanting to protect her. But emotional affairs rarely start with people planning betrayal. They usually begin with emotional intimacy slowly replacing boundaries. And deep down, I think Eric already knew that too. Then quietly I asked the question I'd been avoiding most. "Are you in love with her?" Eric froze completely. That silence lasted maybe 3 seconds. But honestly, it felt like the longest moment of my life. Because people answer fast when the truth is simple. Finally he whispered, "I don't know." That answer shattered something inside me instantly. Not because he admitted loving her, because he admitted confusion. Confusion means emotional lines already crossed far before physical ones sometimes. I sat down slowly because suddenly I felt emotionally numb. 15 years together. A child. A home. A whole life. And somehow another woman quietly entered our marriage while I kept convincing myself I was imagining things. Then Eric admitted something else that made my stomach twist even harder. "She wants to leave him." I looked up sharply. "And?" Eric looked devastated now. "And she thinks I'm the reason she finally can." The room went completely silent again. Because suddenly, this no longer sounded like simple friendship at all. It sounded like two emotionally attached people standing dangerously close to destroying multiple lives at once. Melissa finally meets Jenna alone for the first time after learning the truth. But one emotional confession completely changes how she sees the entire situation. I barely slept after the argument. Honestly, every time I closed my eyes, I kept replaying Eric's words over and over. I don't know. Not yes. Not no. Just confusion, and somehow that hurt worse. Because confusion means feelings already exist somewhere underneath the denial. The next morning, Eric left early for work without saying much. No apology, no reassurance. Just emotional exhaustion hanging between us like smoke after a fire. I spent the entire morning cleaning the kitchen repeatedly, even though it was already spotless. That's what anxiety does sometimes. Makes you focus on tiny, controllable things while your real life quietly falls apart. Around noon, my phone buzzed unexpectedly. Unknown number. Normally, I ignore those calls, but something in my stomach told me to answer. Melissa, female voice. Soft, nervous. I immediately knew. Jenna. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then quietly, she said, I think we should talk. Honestly, part of me wanted to hang up immediately, but another part of me needed to finally look this situation directly in the face instead of imagining it from the shadows. So 2 hours later, I found myself sitting across from the woman slowly destroying my marriage. Or maybe exposing what was already broken. I still wasn't sure. Jenna looked different outside work events. Smaller somehow. Tired. No makeup. Bruises faintly hidden beneath concealer near her wrist. And honestly, that complicated my anger immediately. Because she didn't look like some manipulative woman trying to steal someone's husband. She looked emotionally exhausted too. Thank you for meeting me, she whispered. I crossed my arms tightly. Be honest with me. Her eyes instantly filled with tears. That's why I'm here. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then finally, I asked the question haunting me most. Did you sleep with my husband? Jenna immediately shook her head. No. The answer came fast. Certain. And honestly, I believed her. At least physically. But emotional betrayal is harder to measure. Are you in love with him? That question hit differently. Jenna looked down immediately. Then after a long silence, she whispered, I didn't mean for it to happen. My chest tightened painfully. Because honestly, that answer confirmed everything I already feared. Maybe there wasn't a physical affair. But emotional boundaries had absolutely collapsed somewhere along the way. How long? I whispered. Jenna wiped tears from her face shakily. Almost a year. A year. I physically leaned back, trying to process that. While I was busy saving our marriage in therapy, another woman was emotionally falling in love with my husband. And somehow I never fully saw it happening. He listened to me, Jenna whispered quietly. When nobody else did. I laughed softly in disbelief. Not because it was funny. Because honestly, that sentence explained exactly why emotional affairs happen. Not through passion first. Through emotional dependence. He talked about you constantly, Jenna admitted quickly. He never painted you like some horrible wife. That almost made it worse somehow. Because this wasn't built on hatred toward me. It was built on emotional closeness, growing in spaces where boundaries should have existed. Then Jenna admitted something that completely shifted the conversation. I tried to quit twice. I frowned immediately. What? She looked ashamed. Eric kept saying he didn't want me handling everything alone. That sentence hit me hard. Because suddenly, I realized my husband probably believed he was being a good person the entire time. Protective, supportive, needed. And honestly, being emotionally needed can become addictive for people who feel disconnected at home. Especially in long marriages where routine slowly replaces emotional intensity. Did he tell you he loved you? I asked quietly. Jenna looked conflicted immediately. No. That answer surprised me. But sometimes, she whispered carefully, it felt like he wanted to. I stared out the coffee shop window, trying not to cry in public. Because honestly, that sentence hurt more than physical cheating almost could. Not because Eric betrayed me sexually. Because he emotionally invested parts of himself somewhere else instead of fighting for us, honestly. Then Jenna suddenly looked at me directly and said something I genuinely wasn't prepared for. He talks about you like you saved his life once. I blinked in confusion. What? He said when his father died, you carried him emotionally for years. My throat tightened instantly, because that was true. Eric completely fell apart after losing his dad, and for a long time, I held our entire family together emotionally while he grieved. He loves you, Jenna whispered. I looked at her tiredly. Then why are we here? That question visibly shattered her. Because honestly, love wasn't really the issue anymore. Trust was. Boundaries were. Emotional intimacy was. Jenna looked down before finally admitting the truth neither of us wanted to say out loud. Because somewhere along the way, she whispered, he stopped turning toward you emotionally first. The silence after that felt unbearable. Because deep down, I knew that was true too. Not entirely his fault. Not entirely mine. Marriage changes slowly over years. People get tired, disconnected, distracted. And sometimes another person enters during that emotional distance before anyone realizes how dangerous the situation already became. Then Jenna quietly slid something across the table toward me. Eric's old company transfer application. I frowned in confusion. He applied to transfer offices 3 weeks ago, she admitted softly. He said he needed distance before things crossed lines neither of us could come back from. I stared at the paper, completely stunned, because suddenly, the story felt different again. Not innocent, not harmless, but maybe not fully destroyed yet either. Melissa confronts Eric one final time after learning about the transfer request, but his emotional confession forces both of them to face the painful truth about what really started breaking their marriage long before Jenna ever appeared. I sat in my car for almost 20 minutes after leaving the coffee shop. The transfer papers stayed on the passenger seat beside me the entire drive home. And honestly, that piece of paper complicated everything. Because if Eric truly wanted to leave Jenna behind before things crossed further, then part of him clearly understood how dangerous their emotional connection had become. But another part of me kept thinking, why did it take almost losing his marriage to finally create boundaries? That question stayed heavy in my chest all afternoon. When Eric came home that evening, he immediately knew something changed. Not because I looked calmer, because I looked done running from the truth. We need to talk, I said quietly. He nodded instantly. No excuses this time, no avoidance. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table where we'd spent years paying bills, helping Tyler with homework, planning birthdays, arguing about groceries, building an ordinary life together. And honestly, that made this hurt even more. I slid the transfer papers across the table toward him. Eric's face changed immediately. She showed you that? Yes. Silence. Then quietly he admitted, I was going to tell you. I laughed softly, not happily. That sentence has become meaningless lately. That visibly hurt him. But honestly, he deserved that pain. Because secrecy destroys trust long before physical cheating sometimes. Eric rubbed both hands together anxiously before finally saying, I never planned for any of this. Neither do most people having emotional affairs. The second those words left my mouth, he flinched. Because deep down, I think hearing it called what it actually was scared him too. I didn't sleep with her, he whispered. I know. That surprised him slightly. Then why does it still feel like I lost my husband months ago? I asked quietly. The room went silent again. And honestly, that was the real wound underneath everything. Not sex. Not even Jenna specifically. It was realizing my husband slowly stopped emotionally choosing me first. Eric looked exhausted suddenly. Not defensive anymore. Just emotionally stripped open. I think I liked feeling needed again, he admitted quietly. That honesty hurt, but it also felt real. Because marriages after many years can slowly become logistical. Schedules, responsibilities, stress. You stop noticing each other emotionally the same way. Then someone new enters your life and suddenly you feel interesting again, important again, seen again. That emotional attention becomes dangerous very quickly if boundaries disappear. I spent years thinking being stable was enough, Eric admitted softly. Providing for us, being responsible, showing up. Tears filled my eyes immediately because honestly, he had done those things. Eric wasn't some absent husband living a secret double life. That's what made this harder. He was a good man who made selfish emotional choices slowly. And honestly, that's far more realistic than dramatic betrayal most of the time. But somewhere along the way, he whispered, I stopped noticing you were lonely too. That sentence completely broke me. Because it was true. While Eric felt emotionally disconnected, so did I. We both kept surviving routine instead of protecting intimacy. And slowly, silence replaced closeness. Jenna didn't create the cracks in our marriage. She entered cracks already there. That didn't excuse what happened, but it changed how I understood it. I hated myself the moment Tyler said that at dinner, Eric admitted quietly, because I realized how far this had already invaded our family. Our family, that part mattered. Because emotional affairs never stay private. They slowly leak into homes, routines, children, energy, even before anyone says the word cheating out loud. Did you love her? I asked softly. Eric looked down for a long time before answering honestly. I think I loved how she made me feel. That answer hurt. But honestly, I respected the truth more than another carefully managed lie. Then he looked directly at me and whispered, but losing you terrified me in a way losing her never could. The tears finally came hard after that. Because honestly, part of me still loved him deeply. And that's what made everything so painful. Not hatred, not revenge, love mixed with disappointment. The hardest kind of heartbreak. A few weeks later, Eric officially accepted the office transfer. Not because I demanded it. Because he admitted their emotional connection could never fully disappear while staying in constant contact. And honestly, that mattered to me. Not as punishment. As accountability, we also started marriage counseling again. But this time differently. No pretending everything was fine. No shallow communication exercises. Real conversations. Ugly conversations. Honest conversations. About loneliness. Resentment. Routine. Emotional neglect. And slowly, we started understanding something painful. Most marriages don't collapse in one dramatic moment. They slowly weaken through years of emotional distance people keep ignoring because life gets busy. Then one day, someone else notices the loneliness first. A year later, things still weren't perfect. Healing never works that neatly. But Eric became emotionally present again in ways I hadn't felt for years. More honest, more intentional, more aware. And honestly, so did I. Because somewhere inside all this pain, I also realized I stopped fighting for emotional closeness long before Jenna appeared too. One night, Tyler looked at us during movie night and casually said, "You guys laugh more now." That sentence hit both of us silently. Because somehow, our son noticed the emotional distance before we fully admitted it ourselves. And honestly, that realization still hurts me sometimes. But maybe relationships survive not because people never make mistakes, but because they finally become brave enough to stop hiding from the truth underneath those mistakes. Do you think Melissa made the right choice by trying to rebuild the marriage? Or would you have walked away completely?